Hello GeoGeeks, welcome back. Hopefully you've been following along in our Cygwin tutorial because we're on part 4 and we're going to cover in this video how to set environment variables in Cygwin, or in general how to set bash environment variables. So most of this stuff should also work in Linux and on Mac OS X, but some of it may be specific to Cygwin in some of the details. So if you're running a Linux distro or a Mac or whatever, most of this stuff should still really help you out. And this video is the first thing we're doing that I think is really truly geeky, because it's been my observation that the older I get, the geekier I get, and the geekier I get, the more I want things the way I want them. I want stuff configured the way I like it. And nice thing about the Linux environment or the Cygwin environment is that it lends itself to customization. It gives you lots of options for customizing stuff. So let's just get right into it here. If you've been following along, you should have a terminal that looks something like this. And I don't know about you, but the first thing I noticed, this is a Cygwin thing, is it pulls your user information directly from Windows, which automatically pre-pins your machine name to the front of your username, which is weird. My username is just GeoGeek. It's not Gaia plus GeoGeek. That's weird. So if I type who am I, it thinks my username is that whole thing. And this can get really confusing if you start logging into other machines using SSH or anything involving your username. And quite frankly, I just don't want to see Gaia twice because it's redundant. Now, people that aren't geeks would be like, whatever, who cares? But if you're geeks, this probably bothers you. So let's fix this. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a password file and a group file, and that Linux expects or Cygwin expects in a certain location. Linux expects it in the same location. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm just going to use -c just to do the current user, but you might want to do -cl to give all the local users. That way, if you want to change any of the other users, you can just do it all at once. But for this video, we're just going to do -c. So what it does is it grabs all this stuff from Windows, which has a whole bunch of stuff that, I'm a geek, but I'm not going to go through what all this stuff means. But the short version is this is your username, and this is a whole bunch of stuff, and then home GeoGeek is your home directory, and then /bin/bash is what shell you're using. So we are in fact using, I think you can do echo 0 or echo shell. Either way, you're going to get bash back as our shell name. So that's how this is set. So what we want to do is we want to make this automatically recognized by Linux with the correct username, but we don't want to change any of that other stuff. So what we can do is we can redirect this into a file, and this little greater than sign right there is the redirect operator. And you'll learn about this more in our generic mapping tools tutorial that's coming up. So if you're interested in learning how to use generic mapping tools from the Linux terminal in Cygwin, stay tuned. I'll post those when I get time. Maybe even subscribe and get notified, so that way you'll see when they're posted. We'll do a full tutorial in GMT. But this thing redirects the screen output from this screen. I'm actually pointing at the screen right now. That does not help you. So this screen output would then get redirected into a plain text file and then written to a file that's located in etc password. Okay? Beware that because you're using a single redirect, that means if that file exists, it totally hoses it. It wipes it out and replaces it with these contents. If you want to append, you would use 2 greater than signs. That's the append operator. But this file doesn't exist, and if it did, we want to replace it anyway, so that's what we should do. Oh, permission denied. Well, if this happens, don't worry. I'm just going to leave this terminal open. We'll come back to it. So I'm going to go click on my Cygwin terminal, right-click, run it as administrator. That way, don't you get mad when your computer tells you you don't have permission to do something and you're like, I built you. Well, maybe you didn't, but I built my computer. I'm like, how dare you tell me what I can and can't do? And yes, you have to start with /. That's your root directory. We're going to do the same thing, but with a make group command. because if you look for these things, you'll see that your group is actually like Gaia plus user plus nothing, I think, or none. And that's annoying. We just want the group name to be none. And you can set a custom group name if you want, but I'm not going to bother because, you know, this YouTube channel is a group of one. Excluding all of you out there that are watching. You're part of the GeoGeek group as well. Okay. So let's edit these files real quick. Using our nedit editor that we set up in a previous video. It popped up on my other screen, so I'll pull it over here. Here's our password file that has the user information. We don't want to change anything, except we want to get rid of that machine name in there. And I went ahead and hit Control S for save. The group name is Gaia plus none. That's kind of obnoxious. Let's just do none. And that's it. I saved it by hitting Control S, by the way. That's why nedit is not a cool editor. Like, if you're remotely anyone that could be considered a hipster, you're probably like, I can't believe he's using nedit. I know it's not cool, but it at least has commands in it like Control S and Control C for copy and Control V. So we're just going to keep it simple. Everybody's got to start somewhere. There are far better text editors out there, but let's just keep it simple since we're learning. Okay, so let's see if this worked. I don't need this administrator terminal anymore. This terminal not even needed anymore. Hey, look at that. Now we're just GeoGeek at Gaia, which is really cool. So, geek number 1, we've already fixed it, or at least geek step number 1 fixed. Now our prompt looks good. Hey, speaking of our prompt, could we customize this prompt to make it look different? Like, say you don't like green, or you don't want a little tilde here. Tilde, by the way, is a shortcut that means your home directory. If you type pwd, which is print working directory, or I like to think of it as present working directory, it prints the working directory out to your screen. And you can see we're in GeoGeek, but a shortcut for that is just tilde. Okay, so how do we set? Well, it turns out that setting the prompt, that is actually set as a bash environment variable. And so this ties in nicely to our next topic, which is how do you set environment variables for your particular user? Well, we're using a login shell, and if you don't know what that is, you can Google it and read about it, but refer to our previous Cygwin setups where we set this up as a login shell. So our shell is going to read .bash _ profile. That should be in your current directory. You might be like, when I ls, I don't see anything. In fact, I don't even need file. Go away. But if you ls, all you see is this bin directory that I put there, which is not, why did that pop up over here? That's kind of weird. But if you type ls-l, you get the long version, where it shows you like permissions, and hey, my username is just GeoGeek now, and my group name is just none. Awesome. But if you type ls-la, A shows you everything, including hidden files. In the Linux and Unix operating systems, any file that starts with a dot is considered a hidden or system file, and it's not shown unless you use ls-a, or A is somewhere in your list of options. So you can see there is in fact a bash _ profile file here. So let's look at it. And these are basically typically startup files or configuration files for everything. Like when we configured nedit in the last video, it wrote all that stuff to a .nedit directory, which is pretty cool. And if you're curious what that little ampersand means, that means multitask. It means open this, but then give me my terminal back. If you don't put that at the end, it locks your terminal out and you can't do anything until you close it. So we don't want that. Those of you out there in the internet world are probably saying, yeah, but you can always put it in the background and lock it. Yes, I know. Stay tuned for the generic mapping tools Linux tutorial. We'll go over that again. So this is our default file. The only thing I've added is this PS1 stuff at the bottom. If you're curious what the default PS1 variable is, you can echo it to your screen. And there it is. So that's just the series of commands that makes your terminal prompt. And it has a bunch of stuff in it that's kind of confusing, but we can look at it and we can fiddle with it and get it to look the way we want. So what I've done is I've copied that here, and you have a full experience. But what I'm going to do is we're going to play with one that's a little bit simpler. So you're probably wondering, what's \n, what's \e, what's all this stuff? So \n is new line. \e is usually, it's an escape sequence, but usually after \e involves setting some sort of a font color. So 36M, it turns out, you notice that by default it just leaves it the 0 or whatever, it's nothing. And then it goes to 32M over here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, let's make the first font color 36M. And what I did here is I Googled bash colors, and I just found in Ubuntu forums, and somebody had posted this image, and I thought it was pretty useful. So it's pretty small though. All of the, don't worry, this is like a matrix of background colors versus foreground. Let's just look at this column right here. What you can see is that there's a whole bunch of colors from gray to white to black to red, green. There's not as many colors as you might hope, but there are tricks to get more colors, but let's just stick with these standard colors. Let's make this 36M. That's going to be sort of like a teal color. And then what is going to be teal? Well, \u means username. So my username, instead of being in green, should now be in teal. And then I end the 36M. There's a whole bunch of different ways to do this. You can even just do, just put an M there, and it goes back to the default. But then what I've done is I've said @ see the little @ symbol? You have to actually type the @ symbol in. -e, which is, oh, /e is to set a new font color, 36M. What's that? Oh, going back to teal again. Interesting. And then -h is the host name. So we're going to leave the host name the same color here. And I've probably made this redundant. There's probably a less code I could do to do this, but this gets the job done. And then after the host name, I'm going to set it to 33M. There it is. It's sort of like a brownish color, which kind of looks ugly here, but in a terminal window, I think it's pretty nice. You don't want colors screaming at you in your terminal window, and you definitely don't want a white background in your terminal window because it like singes your eyes. He says while using nedit that has an almost white background, but whatever. So 33M is pretty good. 1, semicolon 33M is also pretty standard too. And then W means to show your current directory, but to simplify everything, that whenever you're in your home directory, just to simplify it with a tilde. So there's all kinds of cool stuff going on here. And here we are, we're back. And then \n means new line. And then I want it to literally type the $ symbol and a space. So that's a whole lot of information. It's crazy that you have to, but that's what's nice is you might think, I have to tell it all this stuff? Yes, but because you have to tell it all this stuff, it gives you the power of being able to customize whatever you want. So how do we get this file to then reload the ps1 command? Well, what you do is you use the command source. And then you type what you want to source. And there you go. You see now that we're sort of like a teal color. Let's make it that super bright teal. 1:36. I think that should only make our username really bright. Let's see. Oh, I made the whole thing really bright. Cool. So I've definitely got some redundant code in here. But anyway, this gives you an idea of how you can customize your prompt. Now, I will tell you that usually what I do is if I have 4 different machines, I'll give each of them a different colored prompt. That way, whenever I'm on a different machine, it gives me that visual reminder that I'm not on my local machine anymore. I'm on a different machine. That way I don't forget and get files confused or something like that. But you know what? With all of that work, what I'm going to do is let's just leave it like this. I think it's fine. Let's look what stuff looks like real quick. Yeah. I'm okay with that. Sure. What's 33 in, real quick? That was the yellow? Yeah, I think it's fine. Okay, but again, you can tweak to your heart's delight and make it look like anything that you want. Okay, now let's talk about aliases. It's been killing me this whole time because I never typed ls-la. I have it aliased, so every time I type la, it automatically types ls-la. That's called an alias, and aliases are super duper useful. And where do you put them? Well, you can put them right in your bash_profile file. You can also put them in a bash_rc file, but for simplicity's sake, let's put them here. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste in several aliases that I have that I think are really cool. Now, ls-f, I believe what that does is it groups directories first, and it gives it might give a slash after an f. I don't know. You can, if you don't know what these options are, you can type man ls, and you can read the manual with the ls command, which is really cool. F, classify, so append a slash after there's a directory. And I like doing that because it shows you that, hey, this is actually a directory, instead of just looking at bin and saying, is that a file, or is it a directory, or is it a symlink, or what is it, So I like this. And color equals tty. I don't know if this works on Macs, but it works on Linux. And then group directories first, so all your directories are at the top. So every time I type ls now, it's going to look very different. But first, I have to source that file. And by the way, if you've typed this command before, the short way to do this is to hit your up arrow, and it goes through your history. And there's my history, and now I can hit enter. So now if I type ls, hey, all right, there we go. And you'll see ll is ls-lh, group directories first, and h is make it human readable. Oh, it's mad at me. It doesn't like my ll command. Interesting. Oh, it helps if you save it. That's your #1 GeoGeek tip right there. Make sure you save stuff. There we go. That's why my bin directory wasn't colored blue, and it wasn't. So directories are always going to be blue, and they're always going to end in slashes. And if I do ll, it will give you the long version. It will also color it, just like our regular ls command does. And it will give you the size of things in human readable format. You'll find that if you don't do this, it usually just gives you how many bytes a file is. And most files are, kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes. And so that bytes section right here is 0, but it would end up being some number that's just not even human readable. And so what the H option does is it automatically adds a K for kilobytes, an M for megabytes, and a G for gigabytes, and I guess T for terabytes. So I find that really useful. So I've also aliased LA. So LA to me is when I want to see everything. It's a shortcut for ls-lah, which shows everything and groups the directories first and colors stuff and puts a slash at the end. So I think those are really nice aliases. There's a whole bunch of other kinds of aliases you might want to do. For example, have you noticed that when you open nedit, it just sort of pops up wherever on your screen? Like mine keeps popping up on my second screen. Isn't that annoying? Isn't there a way that you could just tell it to always pop up in a certain place? Well, you can. So I'm going to turn the nedit command into nedit, and nedit actually has an option, geometry. And what this specifies is it will specify what pixel location do you want this window, the top left of your window, to start up. And since I'm on screen 1 right now, I'm going to say to put it at location 0, 0, because pixels are always, students that I work with always get mad. They're like, how come the origin isn't the bottom left? And I'm like, well, that's just not how images work, because images are essentially a matrix, and the first location in the matrix is the top left. So pixel 00 is up here in the top left. So yeah, ignore this, because I just changed it. And now if I source it and open nedit, it should pop up in the top left-hand corner of my screen. And it does. So that's something I really like. We're also going to use the command gv a lot, which is a PostScript viewer. Where'd it go? It didn't go anywhere. So I'll go ahead and alias that for you. There it is. And that'll do the same thing for GV. And right now we're not going to use GV at all. Later we'll use it in our generic mapping tools little crash course tutorial. It's pretty useful as long as your plots are simple. If your plots are not simple, yeah, you're going to want something more fancy. We're going to use events. Let's see, what else can we add here? Oh, I know something. Are any of you out there in the GeoGeek world MATLAB coders? Because if you are, there's something, you probably know the command CLC, which in MATLAB clears your command window. And there's a bash command for that, but I find it really hard to remember since, you know, I also teach a MATLAB class. So what I've done is I've actually set an alias for that. And I'm going to copy it in here. I'm going to alias CLC with printf, and then that's an escape sequence. So the escape sequence is 033 and then C. And you can look up what that does, but if we source it, you'll see what it does. So if I type CLC, what it'll do is it doesn't actually clear your history, it's visual, it just clears your terminal window. So now you're back at the top again. I love it. Just because if you don't write MATLAB code, it's probably useless to you, but I think it's a pretty neat little thing to have. Now, usually if you want to see the contents of your directory, you use the commands ls, but every once in a while it's nice to open up the Windows Explorer, like where you are, so you can see stuff graphically. Again, there are occasions where graphical interfaces are actually faster. I hate to admit that as a geek, but it's true. So wouldn't it be cool if there was a command that did this automatically? Well, you can alias it. And what I've aliased it to is a command that I call show. So I've aliased show equals explorer dot, and dot is a shortcut that means right here, present working directory, present whatever. So if I source that file, oops, I didn't save it. And now if I type show, it should open up Windows Explorer right where I am. There's my bin directory and my bash profile file, yay. And you can see it did everything. Isn't that great? Okay, what other cool things can we do? Well, let's say that you have a script or a program that you wrote, and you want that program to be accessible. So let's go to that bin directory. You see ls, there's a bin right there. And inside this bin directory, there is a script. You'll notice that the coloring scheme that I have, anything that's executable shows up as green with an asterisk after it, and stuff that's not executable. So you can see there's no X's down here. We'll do a tutorial on file permissions in Linux in the generic mapping tools tutorial. But for now, just know that X means executable. Don't worry about why there's a whole bunch of them. So geek.sh is actually a little program, and if you run it, it actually prints out a message and then dumps the contents of logo.txt out to the screen. Let's see what it does. Ooh, it says GeoGeeks rock. It's totally true. And then it prints out some ASCII art. If you don't know what ASCII art is, you should Google it. It's ASCII, is the American Standard Code for Information Exchange. It basically means American keyboard letters, like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and a whole bunch of stuff that's non-printing. You can read about it if you care, but it basically just means like plain text characters. So this program's pretty cool, but I had to do /geek.sh And you're wondering, how do I type this so fast? You can do tab to complete stuff. It's a really good thing. If there's only one file that starts with GE in the current directory, and you tab complete it, it'll only find executable files that start with GE, which is great. But you'll notice, if I go back to my home directory, that file's not there. So if I type /geek.sh, it's going to be like, hey, that's not there. And you're like, well, can't I just type geek.sh? Can't you know? Well, computers don't know stuff if you don't tell them. So every time you type a command, like ls, for example, ls is actually a program that lives in user bin ls, which in Cygwin, it actually is just a shortcut that points back to /bin/ls, but whatever. It's actually a program. And so what your computer knows, and whether your computer is a Linux computer, a Windows, or a Mac, they all have to know this. They have to have a thing called a path. And the path is where are different directories where your computer is looking for things every time you type a command. It basically should be a location where you put all of your programs that you want executed from anywhere. So this is an environment variable. And if you don't believe me, Windows actually has environment variables. Oh, there it is under Advanced, environment variables. And even your Windows machine has a whole bunch of environment variables for the system, and one of them, you'll notice, is path. And these are where your system expects programs to be. So let's get out of there, and let's get back to thinking about how we could add this to our path. Well, what we could do is we can actually append something to that path variable, because you'll see that if you echo, and what you'll find is that environment variables are almost always all capital letters. Those are all the different locations that Cygwin is looking for programs. So every time you type a command, we can just add that bin directory to the location. So let's do it. Oops. I shouldn't call it system path. Let's call it the user's path. And so what you can do, you can get some space up here so I'm not at the bottom of the screen, is you need the export command, which exports it to become an environment variable, not just temporarily. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type path is the name of the variable equals $path, which is, I don't want to wipe out the entire path variable. I want to append this to it. And that's what the colon does. It allows us to expand a variable. And home is already an environment variable. It should be. Let's double check. Yep. So it's going to automatically add my bin directory to the home directory. And you'll find bin directories in Linux a lot. That stands for binary. And binary is a short for like machine code, like programs basically are usually binaries, because you can't execute text. But you can also execute scripts, which are actually text. So bin directories are basically where programs go. So that's why I called it that. Let's save it, source it. There it is. That was a lot of, would have been faster to type it. I thought it was only a few commands ago. And now I should be able to type geek and it auto completes, because now that's part of my system path and it should work. Oh, it can't find the file or directory because I gave it a local path. That's my fault. But you can see that the geek.sh does in fact work, which is pretty cool. Let's echo our path back. And you'll see that what it did is it added home GeoGeek bin to the end of path, because that's what we told it to do. Take path and append this or add it to the end of that variable. So that's pretty cool. You'll find that as you start doing more stuff in Linux, you'll want to have like maybe all of your scripts that plot graphs will be put in a directory called GMT or plot or something. So I think that's pretty useful. Okay, we have a couple more things left to do. One is, how do you know in Windows when you make a shortcut to something? That's pretty cool, and you can do it in Linux as well, and it will save you a lot of time. And the most common thing that you'll run into is that you'll need to get out of the Cygwin directory and get back into the Windows world. Like, how do you get to the C: directory in Cygwin? Well, there's a directory called Cygdrive, and in Cygdrive it has all of your mounted drives, like your C drive if you have like a thumb drive put in, or like a CD put in your CD-ROM. That'd be funny. Haven't used those in a while. But that's where your drives are. And so if you want to see your typical C drive stuff, you would do ls cygdrive/c, and that will list the contents of your regular old Cig drive, of your old C drive. So let's make a shortcut to my Dropbox folder, which is in my Windows user directory. But I don't want to be typing, so what I could normally do is I could do ls/cygdrive/c/users/GeoGeek, which is my username, and then Dropbox is usually in your user home. And that's pretty cool. And there, that's where I want to make my shortcut to, because maybe I have a whole bunch of stuff in there. In this case, I think I just have, I have a bunch of stuff in there. Cool. Okay. Let's just make a symlink to this, which is basically like a Windows shortcut. But before that, we want to actually make sure that Cygwin makes symlinks that are compatible with Windows. That way, if we ever want to double click on this link, we can actually go there. And so the way to do that is in your bash profile file, you would export the Cygwin variable and you would do win symlinks, which basically, this is only a Cygwin thing. On Linux, you wouldn't need to do this. You would just make a symlink, right? But yeah, that's what this does. It turns your Linux symlinks also to be compatible with just double clicking on them in Windows. So you don't have to do it this way, but I think it's really nice. And the note that this just turns off some warnings. So let's save this, source it. And now let's make a link. And to do this, you use the command ln, which makes a link. We want to make a symbolic link. I'm not going to go into the details of a symbolic versus a hard link. You can Google symbolic versus hard link and read about it ad nauseum if you want. But typically I always make symbolic links. And Cygdrive C, users, GeoGeek, Dropbox. And then what I want to do is I want to make that link right here. So I don't actually need to type anything else because the default is dot, which means right here. So I'm just going to leave that out and go bam. And what you will see is there is now a file in here called Dropbox, and it's usually colored this sort of teal color with an @ symbol after it. So if we do ll or ls-l, you'll see that this is in fact a shortcut or a symlink that points to this actual location. So now I can just type ls Dropbox and maybe GeoGeek tips. And there, it'll show my contents of that folder. I don't want you to see the contents of my folder, a bunch of boring videos in there and stuff. But that's how you make symlinks and shortcuts to stuff. I'm gonna look and see if I have any other symlinks that are useful. Well, symlinks mainly, like if you have directories that are outside of the Cygwin environment that you don't wanna have to cd 10 directories deep every time, I think that's what that's useful for. Oh, speaking of getting out of the Cygwin environment, now that we know how to get out of the Cygwin environment, there's some cool stuff that you can do. So you can actually launch Windows programs from Cygwin. Let's try Notepad. Does that work? Hey, it does. It popped up Notepad. That's pretty cool. Unfortunately, Notepad's not all that useful, but it's in the system path. So one thing that I use when I'm looking at my figures that I make is I want to look at them in Adobe Acrobat. But you can't just type Acrobat, because Windows is like, Cygwin is like, what's that? But if I make an alias, now that we know how to get this out of the Cygwin environment, we can actually make an alias to this. So let's find the Acrobat executable first. It's going to be in Cygwin drive C. Programs are always in program files on a Windows machine. Now, to get a space in a file name in Linux, you have to do \space. You have to escape it. And that's why you should never put spaces in file names if you're ever going to be doing anything with code with them. It's just such a pain. Should be under Adobe. Acrobat. If you don't have Adobe Acrobat DC, sorry. You can use this to find any other program. This is just a program that I know that I use. And I'm just hitting tab to complete, because if I don't know what's in there and I just want to see what the contents are, I can just keep hitting tab a bunch of times. Oh, and there's a folder called Acrobat. It's probably in there. Oops, there's a bunch of Acrobats, so I just want normal Acrobat. Oh, and there's 125 files. I'm going to say no, but I bet it's called acrobat.exe. Hey, it is. So what I can do is I can take this path. Hopefully you turned in your Control-Shift commands, or you can just leave it highlighted and hit your middle mouse button. But let's alias this thing. I just pasted it in using Control-Shift paste or Control-V because it's in that. And I can alias this to be, and it shouldn't need single quotes because there's no spaces here. Oh, it is. Yeah, I don't know. There are spaces, so let's just leave the single quotes in there. Let's see if this works now. So every time I type Acrobat, it should actually type this whole big long thing. Let's see what happens. It might give me an error too because I'm not logged into Adobe Creative Cloud, but let's see what happens. Acrobat. Yeah. There we go. It did its thing. And then it got mad at me because I'm not logged into Adobe Creative Cloud, but whatever. It did work. So this is one of the most powerful things about Cygwin that I really, really enjoy, is that you can do regular old Linux stuff and be geeky, but then when you need to return to sort of like more mundane tasks that are better done in the traditional Windows environment, you can actually run a bunch of Linux scripts and then at the end tell it to open it with a Windows program, which is pretty cool. You can do the same on Mac OS X, and if you are running Windows subsystem for Linux, you can do that as well. There's just some speed penalties of mixing Windows and non-Windows files in WSL, at least at the time of making this video. So we're getting pretty geeky now. Let's see what other things we can do before we leave. Yeah, I think the main thing left to do is this really weird thing that happens with nedit sometimes. Does your numeric keyboard work? Because mine gives me problems sometimes. Yeah, mine does not work. When I'm hitting my numeric key, if you're on a laptop, this is useless to you because you probably don't have a numeric keypad unless you have an absolutely gigantic laptop, right? Those are those separate keys that go 789, 456, 123 that's on the right side of your keyboard. For some reason, they do not work for me in Cygwin. So what I did was I spent several days figuring out how to do this, and I will spare you the explanations and just show you how to fix it. What you need to do is you need to make a file called xmodmap. .xmodmap. So let's touch it. That's how you make a new file. xmodmap. Let's nedit that file. Oops. So we can see it. It's empty. And what this does is the xmodmap, it allows you to keyboard map stuff to different commands. I'm not going to go into all the details, it's just way too tedious. But what this basically does is it gives all these different key codes for those numeric keyboard keypad codes, keys that don't work. And it tells the Cygwin system what to do with them, which is pretty cool. So if we put all that, you can pause the video and copy and paste all those things down and save it. And now what we need to do is we need to tell our computer to execute that every single time. So if you go back to your bash_profile file, all we have to do is call the xmodmap command and tell it to run this xmodmap file that's in my root directory. Because right now my numeric keyboard does not work. Let's see if this fixes it. I got to open a new nedit window because that old one is not fixed yet. But let's type some stuff in here and see if that fixed it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Enter. Yay. So that's great. And if it still doesn't work, make sure your numlock key is on. I don't want to keep that because I don't want xmodmap to execute that stuff. But that has indeed fixed it. The only other thing I can think of that's geeky that drives me crazy about Cygwin is if you use font scaling. And you can see my terminal window looks pretty good. I'm using 200% font scaling. I don't use that on an everyday basis. I just use it when I make YouTube videos, so the words aren't tiny on the screen for you. Xming doesn't look great when you use font scaling sometimes. So what you can do is you can tell it not to scale the fonts and to use the original size. So let's go to that startup Windows command R and do shell:startup. We did this in a previous video. And it should open your start menu startup programs where Xming lives. And what you can do is you can right click on that file and hit properties. You can do this with any window in Windows 10 or Windows 11 or whatever that looks blurry when you use font scaling. You can click on compatibility and then change the high DPI settings and click on this thing down here, override high DPI scaling behavior. So right now I have it overridden because it was looking bad. So if you click that on, it won't scale. So when you scale your screen, your X Windows stuff like nedit won't scale. So you'll probably have to use a really big font or something like that. But at least it'll look crisp. It won't look all pixelated. So try that. I even use this with Google Earth and some other software packages that I use because a lot of developers just don't, their software doesn't look for that DPI scaling thing. And so they'll look really bad. So that's how you do that. Okay, well, I think we've officially become geeky by changing a bunch of settings for things that probably most people wouldn't even care about. But that's why we're geeks. So this pretty much is the end of our Cygwin tutorial for now. Maybe later on I'll come back in and do a video on setting up an SSH server or doing password-free logins or something like that. But for now, I think this will get us done. If you want to see videos on setting up an SSH server, comment below. Or password-free logins when SSHing, I can do a little tutorial on that as well. It's pretty straightforward once you know what to do. Anyway, I hope you guys have a geeky day, and thanks for watching to the end, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay tuned for our generic mapping tools tutorial. Bye-bye.